I was sitting quietly with my 7-year-old grandson Isaiah at my daughter's wedding when his small fingers clamped around my wrist like a vice. The boy's grip was so tight I could feel my pulse hammering against his thumb. We were in the back corner of Mount Olive Baptist Church on the outskirts of Atlanta, surrounded by 300 guests in their Sunday best. But something in his touch told me we might as well have been alone in a graveyard. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the organ music, "we can't stay here." At first I figured he was just overwhelmed. 7-year-olds don't usually handle crowds well, especially not crowds this fancy. The sanctuary was draped in white silk, candles flickered on every windowsill, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with fresh roses made the air thick enough to choke on. My daughter Leona looked like a princess up there at the altar, her dress flowing behind her like water, and Marcus looked exactly like what he was. A man who'd never wanted for anything in his life. But Isaiah wasn't looking at the bride and groom. His eyes were locked on something across the room, and when I followed his gaze, my stomach dropped. "Didn't you check the suitcase?" he whispered, pressing his lips so close to my ear that his words felt like ice water trickling into my brain. That's when I saw it. A black leather suitcase, medium-sized, sitting against the far wall near the gift table like it belonged there. Nothing special about it except for one thing, a small red tag tied to the handle. The kind of tag I'd seen before back in my army days, on evidence that wasn't supposed to see daylight. My hands started sweating. 47 years since I'd left the service, but some instincts never die. That tag wasn't random. Someone had marked that case for a reason. "Isaiah, what do you know about that suitcase?" I kept my voice calm, but inside, my heart was beating like a war drum. He shook his head fast, too fast. "Nothing, Grandpa. I don't know nothing about it." But the way he said it, like he was reciting lines from a script, told me everything I needed to know. Someone had coached him. Someone had told him exactly what to say and when to say it. The wedding march began and everyone stood up. Leona walked down the aisle on her stepfather's arm, glowing with happiness, completely unaware that her 7-year-old son was trembling like a leaf beside me. Marcus watched her approach with a smile that should have looked loving but somehow reminded me of a shark circling wounded prey. I'd never liked the man. From the day Leona brought him home 2 years ago, something about him felt wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. Like he'd practiced being charming the way other people practice piano scales. But Leona was 34, twice divorced, raising Isaiah on her own, and when a handsome man with money and connections came calling, I kept my mouth shut. Maybe that was my first mistake. As the ceremony began, I couldn't take my eyes off that suitcase. Every few minutes, one of Marcus's groomsmen, a thin man with slicked back hair and a nervous twitch, would glance over at it. When our eyes met accidentally, he looked away so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. "Grandpa," Isaiah tugged at my jacket. "You promised you'd check it. You promised." I stared down at him. "When did I promise that, son?" His face went pale. "Yesterday. On the phone. You said you'd look inside before the dancing started." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't talked to Isaiah yesterday. I hadn't talked to him in 3 days. The minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, and for a split second I considered standing up. But what would I say? That my grandson was acting strange? That a suitcase with a red tag looked suspicious? That my gut was screaming at me to grab the boy and run? Instead, I squeezed Isaiah's hand and whispered, "Whatever's in that case, we'll deal with it together." He nodded, but tears were starting to form in his eyes. "Grandpa, what if they hurt Mama?" That question hit me like a physical blow. In all the confusion, I'd been focused on the mystery, on the suitcase, on my own suspicions. But Isaiah wasn't worried about secrets or evidence. He was worried about his mother's safety, which meant he knew something was going to happen to her. The minister pronounced Marcus and Leona husband and wife. They kissed as the congregation erupted in applause. But all I could hear was my grandson's ragged breathing and the voice in my head that had kept me alive through 2 tours in Vietnam. That voice was telling me this wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a trap waiting to be sprung. 24 months earlier, I'd been sitting in this same church for a much smaller gathering, just family dinner after Sunday service. That's when Leona first brought Marcus around, introducing him like he was some kind of prize she'd won at the county fair. "Daddy, I want you to meet someone special," she'd said, her cheeks flushed pink with excitement. "This is Marcus Blackwood." The handshake told me everything. Too firm, too long, with eye contact that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. Marcus wore a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month at the hardware store, and when he smiled, every tooth was perfectly straight and artificially white. "Mr. Thompson, I've heard so much about you," he'd said in that smooth voice that sounded like it belonged on a radio commercial. "Leona tells me you served in Vietnam. Thank you for your service." Standard response. Polite. Appropriate. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he'd looked up the right things to say about veterans on the internet that morning. During dinner, Marcus talked about his family's construction business, their property developments around Atlanta, their connections to city council members and state senators. He name-dropped so many important people that I started wondering if he kept a list in his wallet. When Isaiah spilled chocolate milk on his pants, Marcus's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of irritation in his eyes before he covered it up. "Kids will be kids," he'd said, ruffling Isaiah's hair a little too roughly. That night, after Marcus left, Leona had cornered me in the kitchen. "So what do you think, Daddy?" I should have told her the truth. Should have said that everything about the man felt calculated, from his perfect posture to his perfect stories to the way he seemed to be playing a role instead of being himself. Should have mentioned that in my experience, people who tried that hard to impress you usually had something to hide. Instead, I'd said, "If he makes you happy, baby girl, that's all that matters." Another mistake to add to my growing collection. Over the following months, I watched Marcus work his way into our family like water seeping through a crack in concrete. He started showing up to every family gathering, always with expensive gifts and stories about his latest business ventures. He paid for Isaiah's school clothes, bought Leona a new car, and insisted on picking up every restaurant check. But it was the small things that bothered me. The way he'd interrupt Isaiah when the boy was talking. How he'd change the subject whenever Leona mentioned her late husband or Isaiah's father. The fact that despite all his talk about family and commitment, he never seemed particularly interested in actually spending time with his future stepson. Isaiah noticed too. The boy started getting quiet around Marcus, staying close to me during family dinners, finding excuses to leave the room when Marcus told his long, boring stories about real estate deals and political connections. When I asked him about it once, Isaiah just shrugged and said, "He doesn't like kids, Grandpa. He pretends he does, but he doesn't." 6 months before the wedding, things started getting strange. Isaiah would call me with questions that didn't make sense, asking if I remembered conversations we'd never had, mentioning plans we'd never made. When I'd ask him about it, he'd get confused and change the subject. Then there were the phone calls. Unknown numbers calling my house at odd hours, hanging up when I answered. Cars driving slowly past my place that I didn't recognize. Nothing threatening, exactly, but enough to make an old soldier start checking his locks twice before bed. 2 weeks before the wedding, I'd gotten a call from Leona, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Daddy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "What is it, baby?" "Do you think Marcus loves Isaiah? Really loves him, not just pretends to?" The question caught me off guard. "Why are you asking?" "I found some papers in his office. Legal documents about adoption procedures and custody rights. When I asked him about it, he said he was just trying to make sure Isaiah would be protected if something happened to me." "But Daddy, some of the language in those papers, it almost sounded like he was trying to cut Isaiah's real father out of the picture permanently." My chest tightened. "What real father?" "I thought the boy's father wasn't in the picture." "That's what I thought too. But Marcus asked me so many questions about Isaiah's birth certificate, about whether anyone else had legal rights to him. It made me wonder if there's something I don't know." Now, sitting in this church pew with Isaiah trembling beside me and that damn suitcase staring at me from across the room, I realized we'd all been asking the wrong questions. We'd been wondering if Marcus was good enough for Leona. We should have been wondering if any of us were safe. The reception started 20 minutes after the ceremony, and that's when I made my move. While Marcus and Leona posed for pictures by the altar, and guests lined up at the buffet table loaded with fried chicken and mac and cheese, I took Isaiah's hand and started walking toward that black suitcase. "Stay close to me, son," I whispered. "And if I tell you to run, you run straight to your Aunt Clara by the punch bowl. Don't look back." Isaiah nodded, his small fingers gripping mine so tight I could feel his pulse racing. The suitcase sat exactly where I'd spotted it earlier, tucked between a flower arrangement and a stack of wedding programs that nobody was reading. Up close, I could see that red tag more clearly. It wasn't just any tag. It was the kind used by evidence techs with a serial number and an official-looking stamp that made my stomach clench. I glanced around the room. Most of the wedding party was busy with photos, but that groomsman with the slicked hair, the one Isaiah had pointed out, was watching me from across the room. When our eyes met, he started walking in my direction. "Grandpa, hurry," Isaiah whispered. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the zipper. It was already halfway open, like someone wanted it to be found. That should have been my second warning, but curiosity killed more than just cats, and I'd come too far to back down now. Inside, the first thing I saw was a stack of men's clothes, neatly folded like someone was packing for a business trip. White dress shirts, dark slacks, underwear still in the package. Normal stuff. But underneath, wrapped in a plastic evidence bag, was a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The envelope wasn't sealed, another red flag, and when I opened it, photographs spilled into my lap like playing cards from a rigged deck. The first picture showed Marcus standing outside a motel room, handing cash to a woman I didn't recognize. The second showed him inside what looked like a warehouse, shaking hands with a man whose face was covered in tattoos. The third made my blood run cold. Marcus sitting in a car with two other men, one of whom I recognized from the local news. He'd been arrested 6 months ago for running girls across state lines. But it was the fourth picture that made me forget how to breathe. Marcus was standing in what looked like a lawyer's office, holding up a document and smiling like he'd just won the lottery. I couldn't read the paper from the photo, but I could see enough to know it was some kind of legal form. And standing next to him, also smiling, was a woman in an expensive suit who looked exactly like the social worker who'd visited Leona last month to update Isaiah's school records. "Oh Jesus," I whispered. "Grandpa, someone's coming." Isaiah tugged at my sleeve. I looked up to see the groomsman approaching fast, his fake smile stretched so tight it looked like it might crack his face. But I couldn't stop now. Not when I was this close to understanding what the hell was happening to my family. I dug deeper into the envelope and found what I was looking for. A birth certificate with Isaiah's name on it, but something was wrong. Where the father's name should have been, someone had used whiteout to cover the original text. Above it, in different handwriting, was Marcus's full name and signature. But the whiteout was thin enough that I could see through it. Underneath, in faded blue ink, was a name I'd never heard before, Jerome Williams. My vision blurred as the pieces started falling into place. Isaiah had a father. A real father. Someone Marcus had been trying to erase from existence. "Mr. Thompson?" The groomsman's voice was smooth as honey, but there was steel underneath. "I'm Troy, Marcus's business partner. Is there something I can help you find?" I shoved the photographs back into the envelope and stood up, keeping my body between Troy and the suitcase. "Just looking for the guest book. Someone said it was over here." Troy's smile got wider, but his eyes went cold. "I think you found more than you were looking for, old man." That's when I saw it. The outline of something metallic under his jacket, right where a man might keep a gun if he wasn't the kind of person who cared about church rules. "Isaiah," I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Troy. "Go find your Aunt Clara. Now." But before the boy could move, Troy stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Wrong move, old man," he whispered. "You should have minded your own business." Around us, wedding guests laughed and danced, completely unaware that violence was about to visit Mount Olive Baptist Church. The band played At Last, Leona spun in her white dress, and I stood frozen with evidence of crimes that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. And in that moment, I realized we weren't just dealing with a bad husband. We were dealing with something much worse. Troy was still standing too close when the band struck up the first notes of At Last, and Marcus led my daughter onto the dance floor. For a moment, everyone's attention shifted to the happy couple, and Troy's hand moved away from whatever he was carrying under his jacket. "Beautiful ceremony," he said, but his eyes never left the envelope I was clutching. "Marcus is lucky to have found such a wonderful family." I stuffed the envelope inside my jacket pocket, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Yes, we're all very happy for them. I'm sure you are." Troy's smile looked like it had been carved with a knife. "You know, Marcus mentioned you might have questions about some family paperwork. Legal stuff can be confusing for folks your age." There it was. The threat wrapped up in politeness, just like I'd expected. These people thought I was just some old fool who wouldn't understand what he'd stumbled into. They were about to find out how wrong they were. No questions here, I said, taking Isaiah's hand. Just enjoying my daughter's wedding. As Troy walked away, I watched Marcus spin Leona across the floor like she was the most precious thing in the world. But every few seconds, his eyes would find mine across the room. Not the casual glances of a new son-in-law checking on family, these were calculated looks. Measuring looks. Like he was trying to figure out exactly how much trouble I was going to cause him. The thing that scared me most was how normal he looked doing it. Marcus could dance with my daughter, smile at the guests, and plan God knows what kind of violence all at the same time. That took a special kind of cold that most people never develop. Isaiah tugged at my jacket. Grandpa, can we go now? Please? Not yet, son. But soon. I scanned the room, trying to figure out who else might be part of this. Marcus's mother sat at the head table, wearing a pale blue dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. When she caught me looking, she raised her champagne glass in a little toast like we were sharing some private joke. His best man was taking pictures with a camera that had a telephoto lens bigger than my forearm. Professional-grade equipment for a wedding photographer seemed strange, until I realized he wasn't taking pictures of the bride and groom. He was documenting the guests, getting faces, building a record of who was here and what they looked like. Marcus's father stood near the bar, talking quietly with two men I didn't recognize. They wore suits that fit too well and had the kind of posture that suggested military training. But not the good kind of military training. The kind you get from people who teach you how to hurt civilians. How many of them are there? I whispered to myself. Too many, Isaiah answered, and when I looked down at him, his face was pale as paper. Grandpa, they're all bad people. All of them. That's when I understood something that made my blood freeze. Isaiah wasn't just scared because he'd been coached to tell me about the suitcase. He was scared because he knew exactly who these people were and what they were capable of. This 7-year-old boy had been living with this knowledge for weeks, maybe months. Keeping secrets that could get him killed. Protecting his mother the only way he knew how, by trying to get his grandfather to save her. The music swelled as Marcus dipped Leona backward, and the crowd erupted in applause. She was glowing with happiness, completely unaware that she'd just married into a criminal organization that had been planning to steal her son. I looked around the room at all these smiling faces, family members, friends, neighbors from our community, and realized that in about 10 minutes, when the dancing ended and the cake was cut, something terrible was going to happen. I could feel it building like a storm front, that electric tension in the air that soldiers learned to recognize. But what could I do? Stand up and announce that the groom was running some kind of trafficking operation? Show everyone the photos and the forged birth certificate? They'd think I was having a stroke or losing my mind. And even if they believed me, I'd just put everyone in this room in danger. Have you ever discovered a family secret that could destroy everything? Comment below what you would do, because I was running out of time and options, and my grandson was counting on me to figure out how to save his mother without getting us all killed. That's when the back doors of the church slammed open so hard they bounced off the walls. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, breathing hard like he'd been running. His clothes were rumpled, his face was covered in stubble, and when he stepped into the light, I could see tears streaming down his cheeks. "Stop the music," he shouted. "That boy is my son." The music stopped like someone had cut the power cord. 300 wedding guests turned toward the back of the church, and the silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the sanctuary walls. The man standing in the doorway looked like he'd been through hell and back. His shirt was wrinkled, his pants had mud stains on the knees, and his eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been crying for hours. But when he stepped into the light, I saw something that made my chest tighten with recognition. He had Isaiah's face. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, even the same way of standing with one shoulder slightly higher than the other. "That boy is my son," he shouted again, pointing directly at Isaiah. "And I have proof." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder so thick it could barely close. Papers spilled out as he walked down the aisle, and I could see official stamps and letterheads from a dozen different government agencies. Marcus stepped in front of Leona like a shield, but his face had gone white as fresh paint. "Security," he yelled. "Get this man out of here." But Troy was already moving, his hand inside his jacket, reaching for whatever he'd been carrying. That's when my army training kicked in. 47 years since Vietnam, but some reflexes never fade. I launched myself across the space between us, hitting Troy's center mass and driving him backward into a table full of wedding cake. The crash echoed through the church like a gunshot, and suddenly everyone was screaming. The gun, and yes, it was definitely a gun, went skittering across the polished floor, spinning under the pews where kids were ducking for cover. Troy tried to scramble after it, but I grabbed his ankle and held on tight. "Isaiah," I yelled. "Get to your mama." The stranger, Jerome, according to the papers he was waving, pushed past the chaos and dropped to one knee in front of my grandson. "Son, do you remember me? I'm your daddy. Your real daddy." Isaiah looked back and forth between Jerome and Marcus, his little face twisted with confusion. "But Mama said my daddy was gone." "I never left, son. They took you from me." Jerome's voice broke as he held up a birth certificate. "They changed the papers. Made it look like I didn't exist." That's when Leona found her voice. "What are you talking about? Isaiah's father left when he was a baby." Jerome stood up, tears streaming down his face. "That's what they told you. That's what they wanted you to believe." He thrust the papers toward her. "Look at these. Look at the real birth certificate, the one they buried." I could see it from across the room. Clean white paper with official seals, Isaiah's tiny footprints, and in the space marked "Father," Jerome Williams was written in the same handwriting as everything else. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the papers, but Jerome pulled them back. "You forged everything," Jerome shouted. "You erased me from my own son's life. You're insane." Marcus shot back, but his voice was shaking. "Leona, don't listen to him. He's obviously mentally unstable." That's when Marcus's mother stood up from the head table, and for the first time all day her mask slipped. The sweet elderly lady act disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Jerome," she said in a voice like broken glass, "you were supposed to stay disappeared." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people began to understand that this wasn't some random crazy person crashing a wedding. This was planned. Orchestrated. A cover-up that had been years in the making. Jerome turned to face her, his hands shaking with rage. "You destroyed my family. You took my son and convinced his mother I abandoned them." "We did what was necessary," Marcus's mother replied calmly. "Isaiah needed a stable home. You were." She paused, choosing her words carefully, "unsuitable." "I was broke," Jerome screamed. "I was working 3 jobs trying to pay child support, and you people made me disappear." The truth was spreading through the church like wildfire. I could see it in people's faces as they realized what they were witnessing. Not just a custody dispute, but something much darker. A conspiracy that had destroyed a father's relationship with his son for reasons that had nothing to do with the child's welfare, and everything to do with money. Jerome wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked directly at Marcus's mother. "Tell them about the money, Mrs. Blackwood. Tell them how much you paid the social worker to lose my paperwork." The blood drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." $12,000, Jerome said, his voice getting stronger. "Cash payments over 6 months to make sure I could never prove I was Isaiah's father. You people didn't just steal my son, you bought him." The words hit the church like a physical blow. I heard gasps from the pews, saw people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was evidence of felony crimes being confessed in front of 300 witnesses. Marcus stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "You're lying. You have no proof of any." "I have bank records," Jerome interrupted, pulling more papers from his folder. "Withdrawal slips showing exactly when your mother took cash from your family's accounts. I have copies of the fake documents your people filed with the state. And I have recordings." He held up a small digital recorder no bigger than a matchbox. 2 years of phone calls. Your mother threatening to have me arrested if I didn't stay away from my son. Your lawyers explaining how they could make it look like I never existed. My stomach twisted as I realized the scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just about forged paperwork or custody fraud. This was organized crime masquerading as a respectable family business. Leona grabbed Marcus's arm. "Is this true? Did you know about this?" Marcus tried to smile, but his face looked like a mask that was melting. "Baby, this man is obviously disturbed. He's been stalking our family for months, making up stories." "Then explain this," Jerome said, pulling out another photograph. It showed Marcus shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what looked like a government building. That's you with Judge Harrison, the same judge who sealed my custody case. 2 days after this picture was taken, you made a $50,000 donation to his re-election campaign. The puzzle pieces were falling into place so fast I could barely keep up. Bribery, document fraud, conspiracy, and all of it designed to steal a child from his biological father. But why Isaiah? What made my grandson so important that these people would risk federal charges to get their hands on him? That's when I remembered the other photographs in the suitcase. Marcus meeting with known criminals. Money changing hands. A network of people who specialized in moving things, and people across state lines. They're traffickers, I said out loud, the words escaping before I could stop them. Marcus spun toward me, his face white with panic. What did you say? You're running people, I continued, pieces clicking together like bullets sliding into a chamber. The construction business is a front. You move girls, drugs, money, whatever needs moving. And you needed a child in your family to make it look legitimate. Jerome's eyes went wide. That's why they wanted Isaiah. Not for love, not for family. For cover. Shut up. Marcus screamed. All of you just shut up. But the dam had burst. Troy was still on the floor, blood trickling from where he'd hit the table, but he was conscious enough to hear every word. Other members of Marcus's family were starting to look nervous, whispering to each other and glancing toward the exits. That's when Isaiah stepped forward, his small voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Grandpa, they made me practice. Every head in the church turned toward my grandson. Practice what, son? They made me practice telling you about the suitcase. Over and over until I got it right. Tears were streaming down his face. They said if I didn't do it perfect, something bad would happen to Mama. The final piece fell into place. The suitcase wasn't hidden evidence. It was bait. They'd wanted me to find it, wanted me to discover just enough truth to make me think I was smart. But not enough to understand the real plan. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone had called the police. Marcus heard them too. His head snapped toward the back doors, and for the first time all day, fear replaced calculation in his eyes. The trap was closing, but I wasn't sure who was caught inside it. The sirens were getting closer, but Marcus wasn't going down without a fight. His mask had completely fallen away now, revealing the predator underneath. When he grabbed Leona's wrist and started dragging her toward the side exit, something inside me snapped. 47 years of keeping my mouth shut. 47 years of being the quiet old man who didn't make waves. All of that ended the moment I saw my daughter's face twist in pain as Marcus's fingers dug into her skin. Let go of her, I said, stepping forward. Marcus laughed, but there was panic in his eyes. Back off, old man. This doesn't concern you anymore. Everything about my family concerns me. I walked toward them slowly, the way I used to approach enemy positions in the jungle. Calm, controlled, but ready to explode into violence at the first wrong move. You destroyed a man's relationship with his son, I said, loud enough for everyone in the church to hear. You forged legal documents. You bribed officials. You turned my daughter into an accessory to kidnapping. I saved that boy from a worthless father. Marcus screamed back. Jerome was nothing. No money, no connections, no future. And that gave you the right to steal him? Marcus's grip on Leona tightened. We gave Isaiah everything. Private school, nice clothes, a real family name. We made him better than what he was born to be. The arrogance in his voice made my vision go red. This wasn't just about money or even criminal conspiracy. This was about a group of people who thought they owned the world, who believed they could take whatever they wanted from whoever was too poor or too powerless to stop them. You didn't make him better, I said, taking another step forward. You made him a prisoner in his own life. That's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. He raised his free hand to strike my daughter. I moved faster than I had in 20 years, grabbing his wrist and twisting until I heard bones crack. Marcus screamed and let go of Leona, who stumbled backward into Jerome's arms. Don't you ever, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire church, put your hands on my daughter again. Marcus cradled his injured wrist, his face purple with rage. You broke my arm. No, I broke your wrist. Your arm comes next if you don't start talking. The wedding guests had formed a circle around us now, and I could see the shift happening in real time. These were good people, family, friends, neighbors who'd known me for decades. They'd watched me raise Leona after her mother died, seen me work 2 jobs to put her through nursing school, knew the kind of man I was. And they just watched Marcus try to hit her. Somebody call the police. Mrs. Henderson from down the street shouted. Already did, replied my nephew Carlos, holding up his phone. Been recording everything too. Marcus's mother stood up from the head table, her face cold as winter. This is all a misunderstanding. Marcus is just upset. Lady, your son just tried to assault my daughter. I cut her off. In front of 300 witnesses. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking we're all too stupid to see what you people really are. Isaiah stepped out from behind Jerome, his small voice carrying clearly through the church. Grandpa, there's more. About the other kids. Every head turned toward my grandson. His face was pale, but for the first time all day he looked determined instead of terrified. What other kids, son? The ones in the pictures. In the other suitcase, upstairs in the Sunday school room. They have pictures of lots of kids and papers with different names written on them. My blood turned to ice. How many kids, Isaiah? I don't know. Maybe 20? They made me practice writing my name different ways like I was somebody else. The church erupted in angry voices as people began to understand the full scope of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just about one stolen child. This was an operation. What would you do if someone stole your grandchild's identity? Subscribe to hear more stories of family justice, because what happened next would shake our entire community to its core. Police cars were pulling into the parking lot, their red and blue lights flashing through the stained glass windows like angry angels. Marcus looked around the room at 300 furious faces and realized his kingdom was crumbling. The first police officer through the door was Detective Williams. No relation to Jerome, just one of those coincidences that make you believe in divine justice. She was a tall black woman with sharp eyes who took one look at the chaos in Mount Olive Baptist and immediately started barking orders into her radio. I need backup, evidence techs, and child protective services at Mount Olive Baptist Church on Peachtree. We've got multiple felony crimes in progress and at least one minor victim. Marcus tried to run. I'll give him credit for that. He almost made it to the side door before Carlos and 2 other men from our congregation tackled him next to the baptismal pool. The sound of his expensive suit tearing was one of the most satisfying things I'd heard all day. Don't move. Detective Williams had her weapon drawn, sweeping it across Marcus's family members who were still trying to look innocent. Everyone stay exactly where you are. Troy was still on the floor, blood trickling from his forehead, but when he saw the police, he started reaching for something in his jacket pocket. Detective Williams put a stop to that real quick, pressing her boot against his wrist until he screamed. That's evidence, she said calmly, pulling out the gun Troy had been carrying. Concealed weapon in a church. That's a felony right there. More officers poured through the doors, along with paramedics and what looked like federal agents in dark suits. Within minutes, Mount Olive Baptist had been transformed from a wedding venue into an active crime scene. Jerome handed Detective Williams the folder full of documents, his hands shaking with relief. This is everything. Birth certificates, bank records, recorded phone calls. 2 years' worth of evidence. She flipped through the papers, her expression getting darker with each page. Mr. Williams, how long have you been building this case? Since the day they stole my son, Jerome replied. I knew nobody would believe me without proof, so I got proof. I watched Detective Williams examine the forged birth certificate, comparing it to the original Jerome had brought. The differences were obvious once you knew what to look for. Different paper, different ink, even different handwriting in the corrections. Mrs. Blackwood, she called to Marcus's mother, who was sitting primly in her chair like nothing had happened. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery of public officials, and child trafficking. The words child trafficking sent a shock wave through the church. Several wedding guests gasped, and I heard my sister Clara start crying. These weren't just white-collar crimes we were talking about. These were federal felonies that carried serious prison time. Marcus's mother finally lost her composure. You can't prove anything. These are just fabricated documents from a disgruntled. Ma'am, Detective Williams interrupted, we found the second suitcase upstairs. The one with photographs and false identity documents for 23 children. Your son Isaiah helped us locate it. 23 children. My chest tightened as I realized how close we'd come to losing Isaiah forever. Not just to a custody dispute, but to something much worse. The detective continued reading rights as federal agents escorted Marcus's family members out in handcuffs. Each arrest felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders, but I knew this was just the beginning. Leona sat in the front pew, still wearing her wedding dress, crying into a tissue that Jerome had given her. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes and said the words I'd been waiting to hear for 2 years. "Daddy, you were right about him. I should have listened." I sat down beside her and pulled her close. "Baby girl, none of us could have imagined it was this bad." Isaiah climbed into my lap, his small arms wrapping around my neck. "Grandpa, are they going to take me away again?" "No, son. Nobody's taking you anywhere. Your real daddy's here now, and he's not going anywhere either." Jerome knelt down in front of us, tears streaming down his face. "Isaiah, I know this is confusing, but I want you to know something. Every single day for the last 2 years I've been fighting to get back to you. And I'm never going to stop fighting for you." Outside, news vans were already pulling into the parking lot. Word was spreading fast that a major criminal conspiracy had been exposed at a church wedding in Atlanta. Marcus's construction empire was about to crumble, his bank accounts would be frozen, and his family name would be forever associated with child trafficking. Justice was finally coming to Mount Olive Baptist Church. 3 hours later, Mount Olive Baptist looked like the headquarters of a federal investigation. Evidence techs had turned the Sunday school room into a processing center, photographing every document they found in that second suitcase. The sight of those files spread across the children's craft tables made my stomach turn. 23 folders, each one representing a child whose life had been stolen or nearly stolen. Detective Williams found me sitting in the church kitchen, trying to process everything that had happened. Isaiah was asleep in my lap, finally peaceful for the first time all day, while Jerome and Leona sat at the table across from us, talking quietly about custody arrangements and how to explain this mess to a 7-year-old. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Williams said, pulling up a chair. "I need to ask you some questions about how you found that first suitcase." I told her everything. How Isaiah had warned me, how nervous he'd seemed, how the note from the mysterious woman had led me to investigate further. She wrote it all down, nodding occasionally like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place in her mind. "That woman who slipped you the note," she said. "We think she was Linda Morrison, one of Marcus's former employees. She's been feeding information to the FBI for 6 months, trying to build a case against the Blackwood organization." Organization. This goes way beyond a simple custody fraud, sir. We're talking about a network that's been operating for at least 5 years. Falsifying documents, moving children across state lines, creating fake families to hide criminal activity. Your grandson was going to be their biggest score yet. My arms tightened around Isaiah. "What do you mean?" Marcus needed a child to make his trafficking operation look legitimate. A suburban family with a kid gives you cover to move anywhere, rent houses in family neighborhoods, avoid suspicion. But he needed the child to be completely cut off from any biological family who might ask questions. The scope of it hit me like a physical blow. Isaiah hadn't just been kidnapped, he'd been recruited as an unwitting accomplice to crimes against other children. Detective Williams continued. "When Jerome started fighting the custody ruling 2 years ago, Marcus panicked. That's when they accelerated the marriage timeline with your daughter. A legal stepfather has more rights than a boyfriend, especially if the biological father has been proven unfit." Across the room, I could see Marcus sitting in handcuffs, flanked by federal agents. His expensive suit was torn, his perfect hair was disheveled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like what he really was, a criminal who'd been caught. But it was his mother's breakdown that really drove home how completely their world had collapsed. Mrs. Blackwood sat in the church pew where she'd watched her son get married just hours earlier, sobbing as she confessed to crimes I couldn't have imagined that morning. "We started small," she was telling the FBI agent interviewing her. "Just helping families who couldn't afford proper legal representation. Taking donations to expedite paperwork. It wasn't supposed to become a child trafficking ring?" the agent prompted. She nodded, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "Marcus said we were saving these children from bad situations, giving them better lives. I never thought about the fathers we were destroying, the families we were breaking apart." By evening, the full scope of the Blackwood operation was becoming clear. Bank records showed payments to social workers, judges, lawyers, and state officials across 3 states. Marcus's construction company had been a front for moving people and money, with legitimate building projects providing cover for illegal activities. But the most devastating revelation came when other families started calling the police hotline that had been set up. Parents whose children had been taken under suspicious circumstances. Fathers who'd been erased from custody cases through forged documents. Mothers who'd been told their ex-husbands had abandoned their rights when they'd never done any such thing. Jerome wasn't the only victim. He was just the one who'd been brave enough and persistent enough to keep fighting. The legal machinery was moving fast now. Marcus's assets were frozen, his business licenses revoked, his bail set so high that even his family's wealth couldn't cover it. The judge made it clear that anyone involved in trafficking children would be treated as a flight risk. Justice was coming, slow but steady, like sunrise after the longest night of our lives. 6 weeks after the wedding that never was, I found myself sitting in a child psychologist's waiting room, watching Isaiah color in a book about emotions while Jerome paced back and forth like a caged animal. The boy had been through 3 therapy sessions already, and each one seemed to unlock another piece of the nightmare he'd been living. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Patricia Martinez came out of her office, a gentle woman in her 50s who specialized in helping children recover from trauma. "Could I speak with you and Mr. Williams for a moment?" We followed her into the office while Isaiah stayed in the waiting room with my sister Clara. Dr. Martinez settled behind her desk and opened a thick file that already had my grandson's name on it. "Isaiah is making remarkable progress," she began. "But I need you both to understand what this child has been through. For over a year, he was essentially living a double life. Marcus and his family coached him on what to say, how to act, even how to write his name differently on school papers." Jerome's fists clenched. "They turned my son into an actor in his own life. More than that," Dr. Martinez continued, "they made him believe that his mother's safety depended on his performance. Every time he slipped up or asked questions, they reminded him that bad things could happen to the people he loved. That's a tremendous burden for any child to carry." I thought about all those family dinners where Isaiah had seemed distant, all those times he'd looked at Marcus with fear instead of trust. We'd all noticed something was wrong, but none of us had imagined the scope of what was happening to him. "How long before he feels safe again?" I asked. "That depends on you too," Dr. Martinez said, looking between Jerome and me. "Isaiah needs to see that the adults in his life can work together, that he doesn't have to choose sides or keep secrets anymore. He needs stability and consistency." Over the past 6 weeks, Jerome had been living in our guest room, sleeping on the same bed where Isaiah used to hide when Marcus came around. It wasn't ideal, but it was working. Slowly, carefully, father and son were getting to know each other again. The hardest part was watching Leona try to forgive herself. She'd moved back into her childhood bedroom, unable to face the house she'd shared with Marcus. Every morning, she'd look at herself in the mirror and ask how she could have been so blind. "Baby girl," I told her just that morning, "love makes us stupid sometimes. That doesn't make you a bad mother." "I almost lost him, Daddy. I almost let them steal my son because I was lonely and wanted to believe in fairy tales." But she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. When the FBI needed her testimony about Marcus's behavior patterns, she sat in that federal building for 8 hours, answering every question with painful honesty. When other victims' families reached out through the Victim Services Coordinator, she became a support system for mothers who'd been manipulated the same way she had. The community support had been overwhelming. Mount Olive Baptist started a fund for families affected by custody fraud. Local lawyers volunteered their time to help victims navigate the legal system. Mrs. Henderson organized meal trains for families dealing with court cases and therapy appointments. But the most meaningful changes were happening at home. Jerome had started reading bedtime stories to Isaiah, something he'd never gotten to do when the boy was little. They'd work on homework together at the kitchen table, Jerome helping with math problems while Isaiah drew pictures of the 3-generation family he was finally getting to know. "Grandpa," Isaiah said one evening while we were watching cartoons, "do you think my daddy's gonna stay this time?" I looked over at Jerome, who was dozed off in the recliner after a double shift at the factory job he'd taken to pay for legal fees. Despite everything he'd been through, despite years of fighting a system designed to silence him, he'd never stopped believing he'd get his son back. "Yes, son," I said. "Your daddy's not going anywhere. Not ever again." The legal machinery was still grinding forward. Marcus's trial was scheduled for next spring, and prosecutors were confident they had enough evidence for multiple convictions. His mother had already pleaded guilty in exchange for testimony against the larger network. But more importantly, my family was healing. Slowly, carefully, one day at a time. 8 months after that wedding day, I found myself sitting in a television studio downtown, adjusting a clip-on microphone while a young reporter shuffled through her notes. The irony wasn't lost on me. An old man who'd spent most of his life trying to stay out of trouble was about to go on the evening news to talk about how he'd helped bring down a criminal organization. "Mr. Thompson," the reporter said, "you've become something of a local hero. Families across 3 states have reached out to you for help with similar custody fraud cases. How does it feel to know that your actions that day saved not just your grandson, but potentially dozens of other children?" I looked past the cameras to where Isaiah sat in the green room, working on homework while Jerome helped him with reading comprehension. The boy was thriving now, speaking up in class, laughing again, sleeping through the night without nightmares. Watching him become a normal kid again was worth more than any hero label the media wanted to pin on me. "I don't know about hero," I said into the camera. "I just did what any grandfather would do. The real heroes are the fathers like Jerome who never stopped fighting, even when the system was rigged against them." But the truth was, I had become something I never expected to be in my 70s, an advocate. Ever since the story broke, my phone had been ringing constantly. Elderly parents calling because their adult children were acting strangely around custody issues. Grandparents who suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it. Families torn apart by legal manipulations they couldn't understand. Just last week, a woman named Dorothy from Birmingham had driven 3 hours to meet with me at the hardware store. Her grandson had been taken from his father through a custody case that sounded eerily familiar. Forged documents, bribed officials, and a wealthy family with connections that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. "Mr. Thompson," she'd said, tears in her eyes, "they told me I was just a paranoid old woman. But after seeing your story on the news, I know something's wrong. Will you help me?" I'd spent 2 hours going through her paperwork, and sure enough, the patterns were there. Different names, different state, but the same blueprint Marcus's family had used. We'd contacted the FBI that same day. The reporter leaned forward. "What advice would you give to other grandparents who might be seeing warning signs in their families?" "Trust your instincts," I said. "Old people didn't get old by being stupid. We've seen enough of life to recognize when something doesn't smell right. If your gut is telling you something's wrong with a custody situation, don't let anyone convince you you're imagining things." The camera operator signaled that we had 30 seconds left, and the reporter asked her final question. "What's next for you and your family?" I smiled, thinking about the evening plans we had. Jerome was cooking dinner for all of us, his famous barbecue chicken that Isaiah had been talking about all week. Leona was bringing her new boyfriend, a quiet man who worked at the hospital and treated Isaiah like he was made of gold. Clara was coming with her grandkids, and the house would be full of the kind of laughter it had been missing for too long. "We're going to keep being a family," I said. "The way families are supposed to be, honest, protective, and committed to each other." After the interview, Isaiah ran up to me in the parking lot, his backpack bouncing as he moved. "Grandpa, did you tell them how you saved me?" "No, son. I told them how we saved each other. Stories like these show why we must protect our elders and children." "Where are you watching from? Share your location in the comments, because communities across this country need to know that these crimes are happening in their own backyards." Driving home that evening, I thought about how much had changed since that terrible wedding day. Marcus was serving 15 years in federal prison. His mother got 10 years for her role in the conspiracy. Troy and the other accomplices were scattered across different correctional facilities, their network completely dismantled. But more than that, Isaiah had his father back. Jerome had his son. And I had learned that being a grandfather sometimes means being a warrior. The old soldier in me was finally at peace, knowing the next generation was safe and the truth had won the day. 2 years later, I stood in the same Mount Olive Baptist church where everything had started, but this time I was watching my grandson sing in the children's choir for Easter Sunday. Isaiah's voice rang clear and confident as he belted out, "This little light of mine," his face glowing with the kind of joy that only comes from a child who feels completely safe in his own skin. Jerome sat in the pew beside me, wearing the proud smile of a father who'd never stopped believing this day would come. Next to him, Leona held hands with David, the pediatric nurse she'd been dating for 8 months. David was everything Marcus wasn't: quiet, honest, and completely devoted to both Leona and Isaiah. When he looked at my daughter, I saw the same gentle love I'd seen in her first husband's eyes, before cancer took him too young. "Hard to believe it's been 2 years, Jerome whispered as the choir finished their song. "Best 2 years of that boy's life," I replied, watching Isaiah wave at us from the stage. The transformation had been remarkable. Isaiah was 9 now, taller and stronger, with confidence that showed in everything he did. He'd made honor roll 3 semesters in a row, joined the soccer team, and developed a passion for building model airplanes with Jerome. But more than that, he'd learned to trust again. No more looking over his shoulder, no more careful words chosen to avoid imaginary consequences. After the service, we gathered in the church fellowship hall for dinner, just like we'd done every Sunday for the past year. Our table had grown larger. Jerome's sister had moved to Atlanta and brought her twin daughters. David's parents had become unofficial grandparents to Isaiah, and even Dr. Martinez joined us sometimes with her own family. "Grandpa," Isaiah said, sliding into the seat next to me with a plate piled high with fried chicken and green beans, "tell David the story about how you tackled that bad man at Mama's wedding." David laughed. "I've heard that story at least 10 times, buddy." "But Grandpa tells it the best," Isaiah insisted. I ruffled his hair, still amazed at how normal these moments felt now. There was a time when I thought we'd lost him forever, that the damage Marcus and his family had done would be permanent. But children are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when they're surrounded by people who love them without conditions or hidden agendas. Jerome had married a kindergarten teacher named Michelle 6 months ago. A quiet ceremony in this same church, with Isaiah as the ring bearer and me walking Leona down the aisle as the matron of honor. It was the wedding our family should have had from the beginning, full of genuine joy instead of hidden dangers. Leona and David were planning their own wedding for next fall. Nothing fancy, just family and friends who actually cared about their happiness. Isaiah had already announced his intention to give David the grandfather talk before the ceremony, which had us all laughing for weeks. As we sat around that table, sharing stories and passing dishes, I thought about Marcus sitting in his federal prison cell, probably eating cafeteria food off a metal tray. His construction empire had collapsed completely, his family name permanently associated with child trafficking. His mother would be eligible for parole in 8 years, but she'd be a broken woman by then if she wasn't already. Justice had been served, but more importantly, my family had survived. We'd been tested by something that could have destroyed us, and we'd come through it stronger and more connected than ever. "Isaiah," I said as dinner wound down, "what's the most important thing I taught you about being brave?" He thought for a moment, his face serious in that way kids get when they're accessing real wisdom. "You taught me that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." "And what else?" "That grown-ups who really love you never make you keep secrets that hurt other people." Jerome reached across the table and squeezed the boy's hand. "That's right, son. No more secrets in this family." Outside, the Georgia sun was setting through the stained glass windows, painting our table in colors of gold and crimson. Isaiah was drawing pictures on his napkin, David was helping clear plates, and Leona was laughing at something Michelle had whispered in her ear. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge or punishment, but a family gathered around a table where everyone was free to be exactly who they were meant to be. 5 years have passed since that wedding day that changed everything, and I'm writing this story sitting in the same chair where I used to worry about my family's future. But today, instead of worry, I feel something I hadn't experienced in years before that day: complete peace. Isaiah is 12 now, and this morning he called to tell me he made starting quarterback on his middle school football team. His voice was full of the kind of excitement that only comes from a kid who knows his achievements matter to people who love him. When he hung up, he said, "I love you, Grandpa. See you Sunday for dinner." Sunday dinners have become our family tradition. Every week, we gather around the same table where I once sat in silence, watching Marcus manipulate my daughter and grandson. But now that table hosts laughter, honest conversations, and the kind of arguments that healthy families have. Debates about homework, discussions about Isaiah's future, and gentle teasing between Jerome and David about whose grilling technique is better. Jerome married Michelle 3 years ago, and they just bought a house 6 blocks from mine. Isaiah splits his time between both parents, but every decision gets made together. No secrets, no hidden agendas, no documents signed without everyone knowing exactly what they contain. The boy has two fathers now, Jerome, who gave him life, and David, who chose to love him, and he's thriving under all that attention and care. Leona finished her nursing degree and now works in pediatric oncology, helping children fight battles they never should have to face. She tells me that surviving Marcus taught her something important about recognizing when children are in danger, and she saved 3 kids from abusive situations just by trusting her instincts when something felt wrong. But the ripple effects of that day have spread far beyond our family. The case against Marcus and his network became a model for federal prosecutors dealing with custody fraud rings. The FBI created a task force specifically for these crimes, and they've broken up 6 similar operations across the country. Dozens of children have been reunited with their biological parents, and hundreds of families have been spared the nightmare we lived through. I still get calls from grandparents who suspect something's wrong in their families. Just last month, a man from Tennessee drove 8 hours to meet with me because his grandson was acting the same way Isaiah had acted. Nervous, coached, afraid to speak freely around certain adults. Together, we uncovered a scheme similar to Marcus's, and that boy is safe now too. The hardware store has become an unofficial counseling center for families dealing with custody fraud. I keep a box of tissues behind the counter, along with business cards for lawyers who specialize in these cases and therapists who understand the trauma these crimes cause. People trust me because I've been where they are, confused, angry, and desperate to protect children who can't protect themselves. Dorothy from Birmingham still sends me Christmas cards with pictures of her grandson, who's now living safely with his father after we helped expose the network that had stolen him. Mrs. Rodriguez from Phoenix calls every few months to update me on her daughter's custody case, which we helped turn around using lessons learned from Jerome's fight. There are dozens of families like this now, connected by shared trauma but stronger because they found each other. The local news still interviews me sometimes, especially when other custody fraud cases make headlines. They call me an expert, but I'm not an expert on anything except being a grandfather who refused to give up when something felt wrong. The real experts are the lawyers and investigators and social workers who dedicate their lives to protecting children. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time with enough stubbornness to ask uncomfortable questions. What I've learned over these 5 years is that evil often hides behind respectability. Marcus and his family weren't obviously dangerous people. They were wealthy, educated, connected to important institutions. They wore expensive clothes, donated to charities, and attended the same church we did. If you'd met them at a social function, you'd have thought they were pillars of the community. But children see through masks that fool adults. Isaiah knew something was wrong long before any of us figured it out. He tried to tell us in the only ways he could, through his behavior, his fear, his desperate attempts to get my attention that day. We need to listen to children, really listen, even when what they're trying to tell us seems impossible or contradicts what the adults around them are saying. I think about that suitcase sometimes, how it was placed exactly where Isaiah could lead me to it. Marcus's people thought they were so smart, using a child to manipulate an old man. But they underestimated both of us. They thought Isaiah was just a pawn they could control, and they thought I was just a harmless grandfather who wouldn't understand what he was seeing. They were wrong on both counts. The courage to act when something feels wrong isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop by caring more about other people's safety than your own comfort. Every parent and grandparent has moments when they have to choose between keeping the peace and protecting their family. The easy choice is always to assume everything's fine, to trust that other adults have good intentions, to avoid confrontation. But sometimes the easy choice is the wrong choice. If I could talk to every grandmother and grandfather reading this story, I'd tell them what I've learned. Your instincts matter. Your experience matters. Your willingness to ask difficult questions and demand honest answers can save lives. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too suspicious, or too out of touch to recognize when something's wrong with your family. The criminals who prey on families count on older generations staying quiet, on parents being too trusting, on communities being too polite to investigate uncomfortable truths. They use our desire to see the best in people against us, and they exploit our reluctance to cause problems or make accusations. But love requires vigilance. Family loyalty means protecting truth, not hiding from it. And sometimes being a good grandparent means being a warrior for your grandchildren, even when the battle is harder than anything you've faced before. Isaiah knows his story now. We've told him everything in age-appropriate ways, helping him understand that he was a victim of crimes committed by adults who should have protected him. He's proud of his grandfather for fighting back, proud of his father for never giving up, and proud of his mother for choosing truth over comfort. But most importantly, he knows that his family will always choose his safety over anyone else's feelings. He'll never have to keep dangerous secrets or perform for adults who don't have his best interests at heart. He's free to be exactly who he is, a smart, funny, loving boy who's growing up surrounded by people who would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. That's the real victory. Not the prison sentences or the broken criminal networks, but a child who sleeps peacefully at night knowing that the adults in his life are paying attention, asking questions, and ready to fight for him when fighting becomes necessary. To every person watching this story, I want you to remember something. You have more power than you think to protect the vulnerable people in your community. Trust your instincts. Ask hard questions. Demand honest answers. And never let anyone convince you that love means looking the other way when something feels wrong. Because sometimes one person's courage to speak up can save not just one child, but dozens of children whose stories we'll never hear. Our families depend on us being brave enough to see the truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Especially when that truth is uncomfortable.